This is the latest restoration project. It's an Orion AR602 mains valve radio dating back to around 1956, 1957. And Orion was a Hungarian brand, not normally seen in this country, so I don't know where this radio came from, but I picked it up locally in Dublin from a gentleman, and I'm going to see whether we can restore it. It's not actually working, so it's going to need some repair work done to it, but let's have a closer look at it. Now, the cabinet is in fairly poor condition, so that's going to need to be stripped down. However, all the buttons are intact, the knobs are there, the buttons aren't actually working, the piano key buttons at least, and there's no sign of the dial drive working. There's no indicator on the front panel, so that's going to need some attention. But other than that, it has possibilities, I think. So let's have a look around the back. Here we are around the back of the set, and it has the usual configuration for radios of this vintage. Two fine big speakers, 5 or 6 inch speakers throwing out the sound. In the middle there is a Magic Eye, I think that's an EM80 valve. And down below, the usual setup of a VHF or FM tuner, 2 IF stages, and sound output valve, mains transformer. So most of the bits seem to be here. However, I did notice that immediately on looking inside, some of the coils have actually been broken and are just lying down on their side. So this could be a bit of a problem. Maybe it's just one of the shortwave bands which won't cause a problem. But other than that, most of the parts seem to be there. So onwards and upwards. The chassis is now being removed from the cabinet and mounted into this wooden frame, so I can work on it by allowing me to spin it around to inspect the top or the bottom. And the first thing I noticed was that the dial pointer, which wasn't visible originally because it had actually fallen off the pulleys at the end, was actually there. So I've been able to refix that back onto the pulleys, and that seems to be working, although it is certainly a little bit stiff in its action up and down. And the other thing I also noticed was that the valves or tubes that are fitted to this are all of the Tungsram brand, which is a Hungarian brand. So it appears that these could be the original tubes in the set. And also, on looking underneath and on the top of the chassis, there doesn't appear to have been any components changed since this radio was made. So this could make it a little bit easier to work on, because the circuit information I have on this is pretty sketchy. It's a very bare bones circuit arrangement without any alignment or details of that nature. So that could pose its own challenges as we move along in the process. But other than that, the chassis just needs a lot of cleaning. As you can see, there's a lot of dust and dirt and spider webs which have been sitting there for, what, 60 years now maybe? So the first thing is to clean it up, and then I can start the real work. Some vacuuming and cleaning has been done in the meantime, and as you can see, it has turned out quite well in that the buttons are nice and clean and shiny. The back plane behind the dial on the front has been repainted white to make it look a little bit smarter. Some new bulbs fitted, again to up the ante in that respect. The main smoothing capacitor here has been restuffed with 2 new capacitors. That's inside here, and you might be able to see another electrolytic capacitor behind there has also been replaced. That's the cathode bias capacitor for the main output valve. The other thing that has been fixed in the meantime is the FM tuner, and the FM tuner is adjusted by virtue of this mechanical arrangement whereby a plunger pushes a plastic rod that has brass ferrules halfway down that slide in and out of the core. So as you tune the radio, this lever moves up and down and changes the frequency of the FM stations. However, we've hit a snag. I may have mentioned earlier on, I found that this coil had been lying over on its side when I got this radio. And it turns out that this coil and this one have tiny little hairline wires hanging out for which I cannot find the connection points. And as I said, I had a problem getting even a circuit diagram for this radio, and having scoured the internet, there was no evidence of any wiring diagram which would show where these particular hairline wires are supposed to go to. So I've had to bite the bullet on this and understand that it's not going to be possible to get the AM section of this radio working. So at the end of the day, this is going to end up as a pretty nice FM radio, which is what most people listen to nowadays. And also, of course, it will be fitted with a Bluetooth module, so I'll be able to use it to play tunes through via an iPad or an iPhone or an iPod. Around the side here, the other thing I've done is to replace the mains cable, and for this I normally do this on radios, which means that it now has a 3-core cable coming into it with the earth wire connected directly to the chassis for safety reasons. And the other thing I've done is to also replace, I'll just turn off this flickering light, that's better. I've replaced the magic eye. In most of radios of this vintage, the magic eyes were worn out. The phosphor just wears away over time, so it now has a nice new magic eye. I also need to replace one of the capacitors there. So the radio is sounding pretty good now, albeit on FM only. It didn't need any alignment. The alignment was spot on when I went to check the cores in the IF transformers here and here. So I'm going to leave it as it is and move on in finishing this project. And at this stage, I'll leave the chassis and go over and have a look at the cabinet. This is a close-up of the lower front edge of the radio cabinet, and it just shows you how badly damaged the lacquer was on this particular radio. It's very much crazed, scratched and worn, and unfortunately if I try to strip this, it's going to remove the nice decal that you can see on the bottom edge, but I'm afraid I possibly have to sacrifice that. So the next stage was to actually apply the paint stripper, and I'm out in the back garden doing this because it's a dirty, filthy, smelly job. And basically you paint the paint stripper or lacquer stripper onto the cabinet, leave it for about 15 minutes and then scrape it off with a blade, and it'll take about at least 3 goes to get down to the raw wood. So as you can see here, we've done the paint stripping and the cabinet is already looking an awful lot better. So the next phase of this would be to sand it down, and for this I'll use a 600 grade very fine wet and dry sandpaper, and then apply several coats of varnish, a matte silk finish varnish. So let's see how this turns out. In the meantime, I spent a bit of time working on the cabinet, and underneath the layers of thick black gooey lacquer, scratched as you may remember when you saw the original pictures, was this beautiful looking grain of, I suppose, mahogany you could call it, with different types of wood around the side, a little bit different again, but it has ended up pretty well, and all the scratches and lumps taken out of the lacquer have now disappeared, and the cabinet is looking in pretty good condition, except for the speaker cloth, which as you can see still looks pretty tatty. And even though I tried cleaning it with several different types of detergent and at the end even tried bleach, it just didn't have much of an effect at all. So I'm going to have to try and source a new piece of speaker cloth in keeping with the original look as close as possible, but this may prove difficult, particularly at the moment as we're all in lockdown. So this could take a while. Stand by. One of our local department stores has opened up, and I went in for a snoop to see what I could find for the speaker cloth, and I came across this piece of material which I'm not sure what the use was. I think it was a hand towel, in fact. Now, it was the wrong colour because it was actually a much darker milk chocolate brown colour, which didn't look very well in the setting of this Orion radio. So I bleached it and it's come out quite well. It now looks an awful lot more authentic. And if we look in closely to it, you'll see the pattern on the front. It's a very loose weave, which is suitable for this in that it allows the audio to come out clearly without vibrating the cloth itself or muffling the sound. So I'm pretty happy. Now it's time to assemble the Bluetooth module for this vintage radio. And this is the circuit diagram involved in the components around the actual Bluetooth module itself. So what happens is we have the AC coming in here at this point, and this is the 6.3 volt from the heater chain, which is fed through a fuse and into the bridge rectifier here. The output of the bridge rectifier gets smoothed by a capacitor here, another one here, and across that is a LED and a resistor, just to show that the power is actually active at that stage. The resulting voltage, which is going to be around 8.5 volts, is fed into a 5 volt regulator, and the output of which comes out here, and it gets protected by a reverse diode across the in and out. Another smoothing capacitor here, and now it's fed into a isolator which takes 5 volts in and feeds 5 volts out, but there's a complete isolation in between the input and the output. On the output side then there's another couple of capacitors to smooth the resulting voltage, which finally gets fed into the Bluetooth module. And the Bluetooth module has two outputs, because this could be used for stereo, although in this case it's going to be used for mono, but the two outputs come out through pins 3 and 4, fed through 1k ohm resistors to these two sockets on the output side here. Now in the case of this radio, because it's a mono radio, I'll just end up joining the two outputs together there. The only other components then are an LED, this time it'll be a blue LED, and a resistor to limit the voltage across it. And in the case of the blue LED, I'm going to try and bring that out to the outside of the radio cabinet so that you can actually see the blue LED when it's actually working. So, time to start assembling. This is the printed circuit board with all the bits and pieces ready to be soldered into position. So, here we go. And voila, finished. That didn't take long. So here you can see on the top left hand corner, I just have to attach the 6.3 volt input from the heater chain of the valves in the radio. And the bottom right hand corner, solder in leads, a shielded lead going to the pickup input of the radio. And we're ready to roll. One last thing is the blue LED on the top right hand side, that's only sitting in place. I'll actually take that out and extend the leads to bring the blue LED out to the front of the radio so you can actually see the Bluetooth in action when you switch the radio on. The Bluetooth module is now wired into the rest of the chassis, and as you can see there's some new wiring here that connects the 6.3 volt AC supply to the module. Beyond that you can see the new magic eye, and behind that you can see a glow, a blue glow, and that's the blue LED which has been connected up there as well so that you can see it from the outside. So the chassis is back in the cabinet, speakers connected up, and we're ready to roll. Et voila! Another restoration completed. Sadly, no AM reception on this due to the broken coils I mentioned earlier, but still a very fine result with FM clear and loud, and of course Bluetooth reception via this little blue light that you can see hid underneath there. So let's have a listen to see what it sounds like. So if you have been, thanks for watching.